Hey, welcome back to Evil's Comics. This guy right here is Evil Mike, or Mike if you prefer, and I got a review for you today. From Image Comics, this is Nightclub, issue number 1. It is written by Millar, art by Juanan Ramirez, colors by Fabiana, Mascolo, and letters by Clem. The big selling point was this book was only $1.99. I went with the semi black and white variant with the red, kind of fit the vampire mystique. Before we get started, please like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell if you're so inclined. Comment. I love comments, interacting. So without further ado, let's go. First off, I'll be the first to admit that this was a fantastic read. The art was stellar. And the story was just chef's kiss, you know what I'm saying? But let's get into it. So we start out with in Philadelphia with 3 different characters. We got Sam, which is up here, Amy, and then Danny Garcia. And they're basically trying to get rich from YouTube videos. Danny he's trying to do like a stuntman thing, and he's doing this whole parkour thing where, you know, he's like, yeah man, all we gotta do is make these videos and people will watch, and hey, it sounds familiar, right? We know how that goes. I'm trying to make content and stuff like that, but of course Danny didn't really think this one through, and he takes a dive. Of course they are at the top of this building, and he falls down and gets hurt pretty badly. We do find out that he's got a broken neck and spine and some other injuries on top of that. His mother at the hospital starts questioning Sam and Amy, like, hey, what the hell's going on? And they are honest and explain, like, hey, we were trying to do this YouTube thing. He's trying to get sponsors. He might have been trying to impress the school back at this girl back at school named Kendra. Her mom thinks it's ridiculous, that this has happened, of course, and he's stuck in the hospital, and at this point, maybe a vegetable for the rest of his life kind of thing. Not a vegetable, but, paralyzed, so in the middle of the night, basically, a nurse comes in, does, checking his vitals and stuff like that. He asks for a cup of water. The nurse goes, gets a cup of water, and sure enough, there is someone in the shadows, behind her. The next things we see is the nurse looking behind her, the water falling down, him hearing that, asking about the nurse, and the next thing we see is this new character in the room standing right over Danny, and the nurse looking pretty either traumatized or, but we find out later on she's just hypnotized, of course, by said vampire right here. And the vampire bites into Danny. It does state 3 days later, and basically Danny wakes up chained to a bed and doesn't know where he is and starts asking questions. And the guy basically tells him that he is Detective Nick Larskar, or I don't know how to pronounce his name, I'm sorry. But basically he says that he is his master, and he kind of explains that, not right off the bat, because Danny starts questioning, well, why am I covered in blood? What have you been doing to me, while I've been chained up? And the guy's like, I didn't do anything, that's your pee. And he's like, why am I peeing blood? And he's like, why do you think? The guy Nick comes a little closer to Danny, and Danny ends up biting him, and he uses his newfound powers, vampire powers. He doesn't know he has them, but he's changing, and he bursts free from his bed, snaps out the window, and as soon as he does, he starts catching on fire, and he's like, what the hell? Nick jumps out of he grabs a blanket, jumps out of the building, basically encompasses, him and Nick, and basically tells him, hey man, you're a vampire, and all that stuff that you've ever seen in movies, it applies to you. Sun and stakes can kill us, we've got some powers and stuff like that. And he's like, but you can heal, basically you get some blood in you and you heal like magically fast. And sure enough, he gives him some blood, and and Danny just devours it. At this point, this is like a sped up version of, becoming a vampire 101. Nick basically kind of gives him the laydown, stay out of the sun, watch out for snakes, you're allergic to garlic. He didn't, but basically he gives him the rundown, and he's like, we're going on this like training session. Tells him that he can like low level like hypnotize people. He's also like all these like thought bubbles over here. They're from people because now either they've got enhanced hearing or he can actually hear people's thoughts. But basically it gets to a point where he's like, man, this is overwhelming. And he's like, well, you could just ask him to stop. And he's like, how? And he's like, well, you can hypnotize people. He was like, your mom and your friends back at the hospital, they're hypnotized. You can also do it on other things. And he tells him to do it on the rats. And then on top of that, he gets the rats to do this like semicircle, coordinated thing that he does, which is really badass. And then he tells him to, and the guy's like, all right, the rats have had enough workout, send them back in the sewers. And he's like, all right, on to the next training. And basically it's like a fight. And, he's like, well, attack me. And at first, Danny's like, no, I'm not going to attack you. And the guy's like, well, you're just going to get beat the hell up, During the fight, Danny gets enraged and tries to punch at him. As he does, we see that Nick turns into a whole bunch of bats and dodges his blow. And the blow ends up like, cracking the wall. Nick's like, he's like, yeah, you didn't hit me, but still, look at the wall, man. And Danny's like, I did that? And he, punches at the wall again. And Nick's like, hey, man, you gotta be careful. You don't want to bring the whole building down. You're starting to shake the foundation. And he's like, yeah, and you're about to climb that building. You kind of need it. And he's like, well, we're about to climb that building. And next up, they show basically Nick and Danny are scaling the building. They're doing it in a crawling fashion, and they kind of make a brief Spider-Man joke, and he's like, look, you don't have to crawl like Spider-Man. He's like, technically you can get up and walk like a regular person up on the wall. That's what kind of powers we have. But he was like, it is windy outside, and he was like, we are pretty high up, so he was like, you might want to like hold on with everything you got. He was like, but if you do fall, he was like, your body's gonna heal you from this height, kind of thing. At this point, he tells him, he's like, hey, it's another training thing. Once they get to the top, he's like, now we're gonna like fly down. And he tells him that he can turn into, mist, bats, and wolf. And basically, to get down, he's gonna have to turn into bats, kind of thing. The next thing we line up with is, and there's another thing that's discussed. He asks why he's turned into a vampire, and it's been mentioned twice in the book. But basically, Nick is trying to create an army. Danny does ask what the army's for, and Nick explains that he'll, talk about that later. But basically, he's looking for individuals that have been sick, and they've either, been paralyzed or lost their, they're not able to live a normal life, and so he changes them into vampires to give them a second chance, kind of thing. He specifically states that he doesn't want to like take anybody out of their normal life, kind of thing, just steal somebody. The book jumps over to Sam, basically in high school, and he's getting bullied by the captain of the football team, I think, or a basketball team. It's one or the other. I think it's football. But and basically Sam's getting bullied because he got some answers wrong on the bully's homework that he was supposed to do, and basically that's the punishment, or you could say the gift of him doing his homework and actually getting a couple wrong. Sam is standing by and ends up watching, not Sam, I'm sorry, Amy ends up watching, and she sees Sam take the punch. She goes over and helps up her friend. They're all walking off, and as soon as they do, they get a text from Danny, which they find extremely strange because they're hypnotized with some kind of explanation on where Danny is. But the last they heard, he was kind of, still in the hospital. But the next thing they know is all of a sudden, out of the mist appears Danny, and he's got this dope ass, it looks like a luchador, kind of costume going on, but you can see the mist coming around us. And that's where we leave this issue off. It just says, to be continued in the next issue. There's no there's no advertisement as far as cover or story. That's it. Honestly, I loved it. The art was fantastic, if you couldn't tell, by the visual stuff, but the color palette was fantastic. It kind of has this like almost ink but pastel kind of vibe going. But the story was fantastic. If I would have read that this was like, more about this guy's like trying to build this army, and it looks like he's trying to do something good because he's a detective. They haven't shown any of that side yet, so it might not be like he's trying to do this like vigilante super team to protect the city or anything from a normal crime level. It could be like some vampire stuff. But on the cover they do show 3 individuals. At first when I saw it, I thought that was Danny just like jumping around, because they show like bloop 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 bloop, but I think it's 3 other individuals that are going to be on this team. But for a first read, especially a book that I was going to pass up, it was definitely a fantastic first read. I highly suggest it, especially at the price point, as a great jumping on point. It's a number 1. Hey, but that's what I got for you guys. That's my review. I will let y'all go. I won't have any more reviews tonight, but I will see y'all soon.